Welcome to Yarns from Down Under. Pro-revenge. The a-hole tax.
G'day, mate. Pull up a stump and let me tell you this cracker of a tale passed down to me by a friend about her dear old man. This all kicked off around 2005, smack bang in the middle of a big corporate shake-up. Now, I can't promise this is the gospel truth. A few details might have been given a bit of spit and polish over the years, and I won't be able to answer a truckload of follow-up questions, but I reckon it's a beauty, a dead-set Aussie legend in the making. The expert and the entitled, a clash of cultures. My mate's old man, a bloke now happily retired, was a top-shelf mechanical engineer. When this saga unfolded, he was knocking on the door of 55 and had a shed-loaded experience. I'm talking about a kind of bloke with skills so unique, so deeply ingrained that you'd have to fly in a whole bloody army of experts from a few different countries for weeks or months just to figure out his patch, and they still might not get the full picture. He was the kind of industrial asset that money can't truly buy. He was a straight-up, no-bullshit Aussie bloke who did his job, did it bloody well, and expected the same from everyone else. A solution-oriented legend with zero time for office politics, power plays, or all that saccharine Americanised positive attitude waffle. Basically, he was your classic grumpy older engineer. Gold if you needed a tricky problem solved, but he wouldn't be caught dead at a team building exercise. He'd rather stick a fork in his own eye than join in a trust fall. On the side, he ran a little consulting business. He'd done the right thing, played by the rules, told his employer about it up front, and made sure there were absolutely no conflicts of interest. They knew the deal, and they were sweet with it. Why? Because he was considered a massively valuable player, copping a few industry and company awards over the years, which he didn't give a rat's about naturally. They paid him well, respected his smarts, and gave him the space to do his thing. In return, he worked his backside off, was reliable as an old clock, and mentored the whole bloody troop of young engineers, passing on wisdom that wasn't written in any textbook. Then came the inevitable. The firm was bought out by a bigger fish, a multinational mob with too much money and an even bigger ego. New management rolled in with a truckload of promises that everything would be hunky-dory, but a fresh, Americanised corporate office culture soon took root. We're talking forced smiles, unpaid overtime becoming expected, and all that cringey forced cheering, clapping and rah-rah nonsense. Our old boy absolutely refused to play along. He wasn't having a bar of it. For a little while, the sheer weight of his professional reputation, his deep, undeniable value, kept him safe. He was an institution. But the new managers, a trio of smooth-talking suits obsessed with conformity and culture, eventually cottoned on that the main pocket of resistance to their shining new vibe centred right around him.
They started putting the hard word on him, demanding he conform. When he stood his ground, polite but firm, they got hostile. They quickly realised he had a heap of soft power, not through any title, but through the deep loyalty and respect he'd earned mentoring every young gun in the place. He was their cultural linchpin, and if they could break him, the rest would fall into line. The showdown and the grumpy compliance. The managers tried to force him into a corner. They ordered him to work overtime to meet manufactured deadlines. He looked them dead in the eye and told them he was on track, and that if it was a genuine, honest-to-God blue light special, a real emergency, they'd have to negotiate with the union first. No overtime was allowed unless the union agreed it was absolutely necessary. A classic Aussie workplace right. They tried to strong-arm him into the forced cheering and clapping, even yelling at him to participate fully. And he did. He participated. But with such a dead-set lack of enthusiasm and a face that looked like a dropped pie, the whole corporate ritual turned even more cringe than it already was. Instead of inspiring loyalty, his stony silence and miserable clapping made everyone else start having a good old quiet chuckle, completely undermining the suit's authority. He was weaponising his compliance. The atmosphere turned properly sour. The old boy, being a smart cookie who'd been around the block, knew a showdown was coming. He'd already meticulously documented everything, every single email, every meeting, every hostile word, and had his ducks in a row. He wasn't one to be caught with his pants down. The trap and the counterattack. Finally, the suits thought they had him. They caught him answering a quick email for his side gig on his work laptop during a break. It was a minor, almost trivial infraction, but they pounced. They dragged him into the glass-walled conference room, the official intimidating bamboo room, and sacked him on the spot for nicking company time and resources. He sat calmly at the imposing conference table, looked the three puffed-up managers right in the eye, and asked, his voice low and steady, "Are you sure you want to do this?" They all confirmed, nodding sharply. "Yes, we are." He leaned forward slightly, a glint in his eye, and asked again, letting the silence hang heavy, "Are you really sure you want to do this?" They started putting the hard word on him, demanding he conform. When he stood his ground, polite but firm, they got hostile. They quickly realised he had a heap of soft power, not through any title, but through the deep loyalty and respect he'd earned mentoring every young gun in the place. He was their cultural linchpin, and if they could break him, the rest would fall into line. The showdown and the grumpy compliance. The managers tried to force him into a corner. They ordered him to work overtime to meet manufactured deadlines. He looked them dead in the eye and told them he was on track and that if they, completely blind to the depth of the trouble they were in, simply snapped their fingers. Security was called in to walk him to his desk to collect his gear, then he was marched straight out the door and off the property, effective immediately. They thought they had won. Big mistake, champ. The second he was through the gate and out of their sight, he pulled out his mobile phone. First call, his union rep. The union immediately cancelled the firing. In their eyes, you needed just cause and a proper paper trail to sack a long-term employee after probation. You can't just give someone the boot on a whim. The old boy had his evidence locked and loaded. The company's own IT policy stated it was perfectly fine to use the laptop for personal stuff, including a side business, during an approved break. Furthermore, they had already formally approved his side business years ago. He was on a break. Done and dusted. The issue was now heading straight to the Labor Board for arbitration. Second call, his lawyer. The ink was barely dry on the firing notice before his lawyer slapped the company with a formal cease and desist on 2 crucial patents he personally owned. They weren't huge game-changing moneymakers, but they were his, and he had allowed the company to use them royalty-free as part of his overall higher pay packet. All this was, of course, meticulously documented in his original contract. The suits had just lost access to critical intellectual property. The payback and the retirement plan. He didn't stick around to mope. He went home for a bit of a holiday and to focus on his own consulting business. He'd always been a planner and had enough cash salted away to seriously consider retiring altogether, to spend his days fishing or tinkering in the shed. Within a week, 2 major competitors who'd been trying to poach him for ages rang up. They were keen as mustard to get him on board now that he was free. He politely said thanks but no thanks to the job offers, he was done with the corporate grind, but then suggested he could consult for them through his own company. They absolutely jumped at it, offering him work at twice his old hourly rate. The very next day, the phone started ringing hot. His former colleagues were frantic. His complex projects, the ones only he truly understood, were now stalled without him. He was perfectly polite, but refused to help, saying he'd left everything with management and they should ring them. He no longer worked for the company, remember? Clients who somehow tracked down his private number were told the exact same thing. He was gone. It took just 2 weeks for the first desperate manager to ring him begging for help. He politely refused, copped an earful, and told them something along the lines of, "Sorry mate, you've got the wrong number, I don't work for you," and hung up the phone. He was enjoying the hell out of his enforced break. After a few more of these humiliating calls for the suits, HR rang. The firing, they stammered, was a misunderstanding, a terrible mistake, and he was welcome back to his old job, no questions asked. Again, he politely declined, stating that he'd wait for the Labor Board's decision on his wrongful termination. But, he added sweetly, until that decision came through, he was happy to consult for them. The cost? A nice fat 6 times his old hourly rate. He was well and truly taking the piss. After a few days of panicked mucking around and trying to negotiate the price down, they were bleeding money with every stalled project. They had no choice but to cave. They had to have him back. That's when he hit them with the patent issue, forcing them to pay a hefty royalty fee for using his intellectual property on top of his exorbitant consulting rate. Less than 2.5 weeks after being ceremoniously marched out the door, the old boy was back at his desk, having been forced to employ himself at 6 times the price. The final victory lap. About 3 months later, the issue came before the Labour Board. The company tried to play the goodwill card, saying they'd already offered his job back. The union and the old boy simply stated that he was fully employed elsewhere by his own thriving consulting company and was no longer available for full-time work with the firm. The board ruled decisively in his favour, and he scored the usual payout: 3 months' pay and damages for the distress and wrongful termination, a full 24-month severance package to essentially buy him out of his career, plus pension top-ups, with the company copping the union's considerable labour fees. My mate said her dad stayed on at the firm for a few more years until he was truly ready to retire, only working about 20 hours a week for his old firm and a comfortable 10 to 15 hours for his other clients. He was absolutely raking it in, still charging his old employer 3 times what he charged their competitors, a sneaky, well-deserved a-hole tax, as he called it. The 3 managers weren't sacked, but they were shunted into a separate, isolated group for bonus calculations, and the astronomical cost of the old boy's consulting fees and the Labour Board fiasco were all budgeted there. They were constantly and hopelessly over budget and missed out on their bonuses for years, a continuous, humiliating financial penalty for their arrogance. One of them eventually chucked in the towel because of the perpetual mess. After that, my mate said her dad would just meet any management complaints or attempts to pressure him with a big shit-eating grin and the simple and devastating line, "What are you going to do? Fire me?"
Thanks for watching another clip by Yarns from Down Under. If you enjoyed this clip, please hit the thumbs up, the subscribe button and the bell. Another story from Yarns from Down Under will drop real soon. Cheers.